Okay, so Jill, great to have you back onto the program. Lots going on here, but I want to jump right into it, and I want to ask you this question. What are your thoughts on the recent wave of school protests across the country, particularly regarding issues such as gun control, gun violence, student safety, and so on?
Well, I would like to be seeing the student protests on those subjects. It seems like the only subject that I'm seeing, and remember, I graduated from Columbia Law, so I'm particularly following what the protests are at Columbia, but I also live in Evanston, and there's been a peaceful resolution in Evanston at Northwestern University. The students have dismantled their tent city and have agreed to peacefully protest as is consistent with the rules of Northwestern in terms of noise and blockage, et cetera, and to share the stage as is required so that everybody's treated equally, and to have a voice in where the university invests, which seems like a very brilliant solution. And I'm concerned about the facts that are unknown to the student protesters. I'm concerned that they don't understand the First Amendment and civil disobedience are not the same thing, and that even the First Amendment, which I was on the board of the ACLU. I'm a firm believer in all of our rights, including the First Amendment. But I'm willing to recognize that when you are doing something that can cause a dangerous result and make other people in danger, that your First Amendment rights have to be coordinated with the rights of others.
Because I'm watching as these, first of all, this is not just at Columbia. It's not just at now GW, at University of Miami, University of Pennsylvania, Brown. I mean, at Harvard, Yale. I mean, it is all over. It's almost like Students United as for Palestine. I mean, it has grown. And my real question is, as I'm thinking about it, who started this? How did it get started? And is a lot of this sort of so that people can Instagram themselves or social media themselves? Because there's a lot of questions that are asked to students by individuals who are out there in the media asking questions, and they have no idea what they're even talking about. They don't understand the anti-Semitic trope of the comments of from the river to the sea. They don't even understand. And then when they turn around, and I'm talking about these young students, they're talking about divestiture of basically not just any Israeli company. What they're really referring to is the divestiture from accepting money from any Jewish philanthropist. With all due respect, a lot of that money is what's going to pay their tuition, especially to the students that are on scholarship. Look, they worked hard during their high school careers. They have scholarships. They're at the best institutions that this country has to offer. And now you're looking at either suspension or expulsion.
That's, your choice is you either have them physically removed by the police, which only exacerbates situations, or you start the process that is called for under campus rules, which would be suspension or expulsion. And students at Columbia are being subjected to that. You've raised so many good points in what you said. And it goes back to one, what is the factual predicate? What started them on this? The situation in Gaza is horrendous. I don't think anybody, Jewish, not Jewish, no one's going to disagree that is unfortunate. But why aren't the students asking, why did Hamas, A, start this by attacking, B, taking hostages, and C, refusing to return them, and by putting their own citizens at risk by, one, taking all the humanitarian aid for their own selves?
Mhm.
Why did they put them at risk by making them human hostages? If you have a group, as Hamas is, that is dedicated to the eradication of Jews and of the state of Israel, and will not cave on that as part of its mission and goals and charter, then how can you negotiate with them? Who is there to negotiate with? I will be equally critical of Netanyahu. I do not support what he is doing, but I also want there to be equal treatment. And there have been so many professors and so many great political thinkers writing, like, why are the students not asking this? Why do they not look at the history where this land belonged to the Jews before? I mean, they were sort of like the American Indian. They were there first. And the facts don't seem to matter to the students who are protesting. I'm old enough that I was part of the Vietnam War protest. I was part of the Students for a Democratic Society, Abby Hoffman, the Chicago 7 trial. And I also was I graduated Columbia under armed guard. There were horseback police armed because it was during the protest, which included the occupation of the president's office. But we did at least go through with our graduation, which is across from the main campus. The law school is just outside the gates of the Columbia place where the tent city has been set up. And so, I mean, this is something that I understand, but there was much more knowledge in the Vietnam protesters. They knew what the facts were. I just feel like this has been a violent reaction to Israel's overreaction, and maybe not overreaction, because I don't know what you do if you're going to try to get rid of Hamas.
Right.
And they're in tunnels.
I've said that same sort of statement, and I've said it to individuals who are critical of Israel. And I say, just imagine, first of all, what is a reasonable response to what happened on October 7th? What's a reasonable response? And just imagine for a quick second, God forbid, that something like that happened to Americans here in California, right? At Coachella, right? Or some other, festival where they come over the wall, they come through the wall, whatever it might be, they shoot people, they light them on fire, they rape the women, they take the hostages, what would Americans want as a response? Because I remember very clearly right after 9/11, I remember the same people right now that are, trying to come up with an answer, especially when, people started making the claims that, there were people dancing on top of their cars and celebrating 9/11, in New Jersey. Do you remember some of the reactions of Americans? It was like, let's level the whole fucking country. Let's just blow the whole Middle East up. Well, okay, right? I get it. You're angry. I'm angry. I lost people who I knew. So we all have the right to be angry as Americans. So what is a fair and reasonable response that Israel can take, or do they not get that right because we're Jews? Right? Is that really the question? Is this really about Israel, or is this about anti-Semitism?
I would not agree that everyone who is protesting what's going on is anti-Semitic. I think there are other reasons for protesting the death of people.
Me too.
But I would ask every one of them to say, what is the solution when Hamas is not on a military base? They're in a civilian hospital. They're in a civilian school. They're in civilian apartments. If you're going to capture Hamas and kill Hamas and prevent them from attacking you days later, how do you do that when they are in positions that necessitate danger to civilians. How can the international community not rise up against them and say, you are violating the rules of war by doing this? And Israel could and should attack military bases, but there is no such thing. The military command structure is in hospitals and other public buildings.
Right.
And that's what is causing the danger. That's the problem. And, if all of the civilians, and you could identify who's civilian and who isn't an unarmed soldier, not unarmed, but ununiformed soldier, but assuming you could tell who the soldiers are and who the civilians are, and you would have a country that would take all the civilians, then you'd have a fair fight. But the problem for Israel is it isn't a fair fight because of how this is set up. This is long planned. All these tunnels, they didn't get built in the last week or month or year.
The crazy thing is that you not only can you not tell the Palestinians from Hamas, those,
right,
but you can't even tell if you put side by side the Palestinians and the Israelis, being that we're Semitic, that we're cousins. They all look the same to me anyway. It's funny because it reminds me of the movie, Don't Mess with the Zohan. When they turn around, they're fighting across the street, and they're like, well, you look like him, and he looks like. It's the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, being Semitic, they have very similar features, and they look the same. I find the whole thing, like you, to be so sad, right? The loss of life, but Hamas is a terrorist organization, and Israel has the right. And I get angry at people that say that they don't. They have the right to exist. And it is incumbent upon every government, America as well. It's really the sole job of the president to ensure the safety and national security of its citizenry. I mean, that's really what it's about.
I agree with you completely on that. And that's not happening, but I've talked to and I've read extensively the opinions of people who I think are really smart and educated on this. And I have not read one single commentary that says, here's the solution. Here's what has to happen. Other than, Thomas Friedman had some good suggestions. I believe he may be overly optimistic, and I am an optimist by nature, but it was like, well, we have to trust that we can have a government cooperation with Hamas. I think that's maybe delusional. I don't think it's possible.
I heard Professor Galloway made a statement about that, and I totally agree with him on basically everything that he said during his interview. But I want to ask you this, Jill. How do you view the role of young activists in shaping the political landscape today? And what advice would you give to young people, especially, as you said, you were there, for the protests in Vienna. I was protesting in my house, while, I was 7 years old at the time. But,
make me feel old. Go ahead.
What advice? Believe me, we're all going to get there. At one point in time, I'm going to be talking about this, to somebody. But what advice would you give to young people looking to make a difference? You see, that's what I think is going on here. There are some who really want to make a difference, but I just think that the message and how it's going about, when you start smashing the windows out of the door, and then you start attaching tables to the door, and then you take over the administrative building. Look, I know what I would do. And each and every one of those kids that are in there, the chancellor of Vanderbilt, I think he has the right message. You peacefully protest. You do you, and we will leave you alone. We won't say anything to stop your cause. But once you start interfering with another student's right of peaceful enjoyment of the school, or you start to occupy areas that you're not permitted to be in, you're violating school guidelines, regardless of whatever the reason might be, you're out of here. And there's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of bright young students all over this country that will not have a place to go in a few months come September when school restarts. If you have, you're now applying from USC and you want to go to NYU, really? You think the administration, the admissions department is not looking as to what happened to you?
Right.
And you think that the school, USC, is not going to tell them that this person was expelled? It's on your record, pal. So let me go back to that. What advice would you give to these young people?
So, I have had the privilege of working with Victor Shi, who on a podcast called IGen Politics. He just finished college and he has started working for the Biden campaign. He is the coordinator of youth communications. And so I've spent a lot of time talking to Victor and talking to other young people who are activists. And I've also talked to some of the best and brightest of political people and journalists. And one piece of advice goes back to facts matter, and you have to have the facts. So the first thing I would say is do some homework, find out what the actual facts are. And you can pick, and again, this is in terms of making a difference, pick a candidate, get informed well enough on any one of the topics. So many young people go, it's overwhelming. I don't know whether to focus on guns or on environment or on abortion, or I don't. Right. Pick one and learn enough about that you can be conversant and talk to other people and try and convince them that they should vote for Joe Biden because of this issue. You don't have to get them on all the issues. If they happen to have one other issue they care about, go and educate yourself on that and then have another conversation. But it's going to be up to youth to vote, which they haven't in the past done. They have to understand not voting is voting in a way that they aren't in control of. So they must vote. They have to pick a realistic choice. They could write in a candidate, but that candidate's not going to win. And one of the other two is going to be the president, right. And you might as well pick the one that you like the best. You don't have to love that person, think they're perfect. You have to think that they are the best choice for America at this time. And if you start studying the policy differences, I think students will come to see that there's a big difference on some things. On others, going back to the Gaza situation, Donald Trump is a huge supporter of Israel and of Netanyahu. He would be far more extreme in supporting Israel than Joe Biden is. So if you don't like what Joe Biden is doing, you're going to hate what Donald Trump does. And that has to be part of your calculation of who do you vote for. But voting is the most important thing. There is so much at stake now. And so students need to be informed with facts, right. And they need to take a stand one way or the other and understand when they yell, as you said, from the river to the sea, that is calling for genocide. And do they really mean that they want genocide? I don't think they do. They just don't understand.
But what happens with these students that are walking around with T-shirts, pro-Hamas T-shirts? I mean,
saying
clearly
intifada now.
Exactly. Yep. Clearly, they do want genocide. And with all due respect to them, shit's not going to happen. All right.
I don't know that they want. Do you think they really want genocide, or they don't really understand what they're saying is genocide?
Well, is it not really the same thing? If you're going to stand up for Hamas, look, let me be very clear about something. I have friends who are Palestinian. There's one specific. We go out for dinner with her and her husband all the time. I consider them one of our closest family friends. She's Palestinian, and we have this conversation all the time. And she understands my heart bleeds for innocent Palestinian civilians, the same as it bleeds for innocent Israeli civilians. And I too would like this to stop, but I'm still trying to figure out the calculus, what needs to be done in order so that Israel can exist. Because if you leave it up to, even with these young kids that are walking around with, I support Hamas, posters and T-shirts, you support a terrorist organization. And I'll tell you the thing that I find the most troubling of them all. I watched as this one young girl, she had the multicolored hair, the nose ring, the whole 9 yards. And the interviewer asked her if she is a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And she said, yes, she is, because her pro-Palestinian banner had the colors of the rainbow on it. And he turned around and he said to her, are you aware that whether you are pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, regardless, if you were in Gaza right now, including other Middle Eastern countries, because of who you are, have you ever wished that you had whiter and a brighter smile? Well, before you visit a dentist, you should know that their whitening treatments, they're very expensive. And you know what? It's not just the price. You also have to book the appointment, schedule time away from work or family to sit in a dentist's office chair while undergoing this procedure. It's a hassle. Fortunately, now you can try Smile Actives at home or anywhere, anytime. Smile Actives offers a safe and an affordable alternative to those expensive whitening procedures. You see, I've had past experience with these whitening agents, and I gotta tell you, I hated it. It causes these zingers afterwards. It's really uncomfortable. And I'm a big coffee drinker, and so I hate to say it, your teeth get stained. But that's why it's so important to use Smile Actives, because it brings you a bright smile, and a bright smile makes a good impression. Smile Actives makes a teeth whitening gel that can simply be added to your toothpaste every time that you brush your teeth. So there's no change in your routine, there's no extra time, and there's no messy strips, trays, or lights. Simply add Smile Actives Pro Whitening Gel to your regular toothpaste. It's been formulated with polyclean technology to boost stain removal and deliver active whitening ingredients into teeth's grooves and crannies so that you get better whitening. 97% of Smile Actives users in a clinical trial reported up to 6 shades whiter on average. Listen to what I just said, up to 6 shades whiter on average, and all within 30 days. I mean, that's the kind of trial that I like. So what are you waiting for? Start getting comments on your whiter, brighter smile in just days. So visit smileactives.com/Cohen today to receive a special buy one, get one free offer with auto delivery, plus free shipping and handling. That's smileactives.com/Cohen. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. Because of your choice, they would stone you. They would smash your skull with a rock and leave you for the buzzards. And she had no comment, which goes right back to what you said.
Yeah.
Uneducated. And how could you be uneducated at the top schools in America, Ivy League and sub-Ivy League schools, to be this uneducated? I don't understand it.
Well, it's also been a failure of the universities to use this as a teaching moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think they could and should do better on getting facts out. And, I used to, as a defense lawyer, say, you have to listen until after the defense puts in its case, because no matter how thin the pancake, it has two sides. Well, I don't believe that anymore. There's only one set of facts.
Right.
There aren't two sides to facts. And somehow students have failed to see that they need to see the full picture. They need to see the history. They need to see who's attacked who. It's only one way. The bombardment comes into Israel. Israel may retaliate, but Israel doesn't start it. And I feel very strongly that education could make a difference in how people perceive what's going on.
Except the problem is they do have an answer to that, because that exact topic was brought up by the same interviewer to somebody else, because they use the word occupiers. They're saying, okay, we don't agree with the hostage taking, with the murder, the rape, the burning and the killing of babies. We don't agree with that. But Israel has been occupying Palestine for 70 years now, and enough has become enough. They don't know the facts. They don't know what's really been going on. And again, I hate the fact that this is happening. Not just because it's before a presidential election. I hate the fact that this happens ever. And unfortunately, I agree with you that there is not enough information being given at the schools, because just as soon as somebody wants to engage in the conversation, they shout them down. They with the bullhorns, with the high screeching pitches to drown out anybody who has an opinion that's different than theirs. But speaking about, I want to just bring it back domestically here for a sec, because obviously you're watching television and you're seeing all the recent trials and the legal proceedings involving a whole slew of people right now that were part of or are currently part of that former administration. So my question to you, Jill, is what implications do you see for the future of American politics and the rule of law?
Another very important and complex question. I am very concerned about a number of things. At the top of my list is the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And in particular, the argument on immunity that we just saw last Thursday, the 25th. I think that was last Thursday. And I'm very concerned about, one, the fact that they took the case, two, how they framed the question before them, but even more so, how they actually pushed back and said, well, we're actually creating a rule for the ages. This isn't just about the facts of this case. One of the fundamentals of law, I mean, for sure, is that the court only determines an actual case or controversy.
Yep.
You don't issue hypothetical rulings on hypothetical questions or make a policy judgment and say this is what the policy should be. That's not the court's role. And that's what they were doing here, saying, well, we have to make a rule that will apply throughout. And they were more worried about having a rogue prosecutor bring an unfair case against the former president, not even the sitting president, but the former president, than they were worried about what would happen with a rogue president who feels that he can order SEAL Team 6 to kill all his political opponents. That's what's so worrying to me, is where we are with the Supreme Court, and also with all the Republicans who withstand all logic and reason and are continuing to support a person who has appointed all the justices to make it his, who has not done the job of a president, who makes promises that he's never kept and never will. And yet middle class and lower middle class people believe they're benefiting from him. And I don't know how they get to that point. I think that's a problem in America right now, based on, again, a lack of facts.
For me, forgetting about, because I'm not talking about my former employer, I'm not going to mention his name. I've made my promise that I was not going to talk about the case or him. So I'm just going to use the hypothetical, which you kind of introduced, a rogue president.
Right.
Not him, right? A rogue president. Let's say it's Joe Biden. The Supreme Court comes back that presidential immunity for anything, whether you are or are not the president, right? You are permitted to do whatever you want. You can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not be charged. You can rob a bank and not be charged. You can do whatever you want. My question is,
Yeah.
what's the likelihood that the Supreme Court will exist if you have a president who is rogue that elects to be a king, a monarch, a dictator, a Führer, a supreme leader, instead of a president? What do you think happens to the Supreme Court? What do you think happens to Congress? The first thing, of course, you do is you shut them all out. There is no more Supreme Court. I, King Michael, and the Supreme Court, I make the decisions. And I will have Lara Trump, or I will have, my wife make the determinations simply because as king, I can do whatever I want. And as far as Congress, we don't need Congress anymore. We're already, I'm going to make all the rules legislatively and so on. That's the danger here. You agree?
I think the danger goes even beyond that. Going back to Watergate, I never feared for democracy. The Supreme Court took the case and ruled immediately. It didn't delay for no reason at all. I mean, here you had this immunity argument based on a false premise to begin with, and it was fully briefed at the Court of Appeals in D.C.
Yep.
And they gave until April 25th to have the argument so that they didn't need briefing time. And now they're putting off the decision. Of course, we don't know. It could come tomorrow. But as far as it appears, it's going to be the end of the term. And then they may remand, which means that there will not be a trial in this very, very significant and important case that Americans, before they vote, should know the outcome of. And it won't happen. And then if he should be elected, that's the end of the case. It's a federal case. He tells his attorney general, dismiss it. That's the end of it.
Well, he doesn't even need to tell the attorney general because there won't be an attorney general. He just turns around and there won't be a Supreme Court. In fact, something that I say to people all the time as well, if we create a president who becomes a king, right, or a monarch, a dictator, Führer, whatever you want to call him, supreme leader, that acts in the same manner, for example, as a monarch like Mohammed bin Salman, what do you think happens to people like Elon Musk or Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or the guys with the $1 billion houses that are worth $200, $300, $400 billion, whatever the amount is? What do you think happens to their money?
Well,
how about you take it?
If you look at Russia, the oligarchs are still doing very well. I mean, Putin needs some people around him. And so he picks a few select people and lets them thrive.
But
yes,
he picked them. None of them had any money before he picked them. It's very different. Here, you have people that already have assets and collateral and properties and so on. A dictator in this country would turn around and say to Elon Musk, how much were you worth? And he'll say, about 300 billion. How about you're worth nothing? And he takes it all. And you say, nah, that's not possible. It most certainly is. Because if he's controlling the military and he controls all levers of power because he's conferred all power onto him, there's no more judiciary. There's no more legislative branch. Is there a legislative branch or a judiciary in Saudi Arabia? Not legit. It's whatever Mohammed bin Salman says. Do you think that there's a judiciary or a legislative branch in North Korea? No. And that's what will ultimately happen here. So when you bring up this loss of democracy, I don't think people are thinking far enough how crazy that this could potentially be.
Well, I said from the very beginning of Trump's administration that I felt like I was eventually living in 1939 in Germany. And Hitler did not take over and destroy everything at once. It was a little at a time, a little here, a little there, until it was too late for everybody. So it would start out with Jews can't own a store. Then it would go to Jews can't work in a store. Then Jews can't go into a store. Jews can't leave the ghetto. And by the time all that happened, it was too late. And so I'm hoping that voters in America will see the potential slippage a little at a time. Don't forgive that first little step. You have to take a response to that, or else you're in real trouble going forward.
Okay.
And I think we shouldn't be talking about democracy in sort of a general form, because I don't think people all realize what democracy is. You need to talk about it in specific terms of, this is what's going to happen to you. People get what's going to happen to them. They don't care so much about, I mean, some people care about others, but a lot of people are much more concerned about, how will this affect me? There's a lot of rich Americans who think that Donald Trump is terrible, but for them, his tax policies are terrific. And so, well, we're going to just support him for that reason. We're going to ignore all the other bad things.
Because if their child or grandchild needs an abortion, no problem. They're going to get on their airplane, and they're going to fly them off to Europe, where they have their other house or a fifth house, and the laws don't apply to them because financially they're outside of those boundaries of the law. But can I ask you this additional question then? Again, in your opinion, what are the most pressing issues facing our country today? And what steps do you believe are necessary to address them effectively?
So the list of issues that I care about is enormous. As a woman, of course, I'm going to list women's rights, which is not just right to bodily autonomy, but right to equality. I think the Equal Rights Amendment is essential, that it must be recognized for what it is. It has been signed by the requisite number of states. It is clear the law says that rescission is not legal, cannot happen. That means that it should be announced by the president or the archivist that it is the law of the land, and from now on there will be an equal rights part of our Constitution. So I would put that at the top of my list. I would put little things like cameras in courts at the top of my list. It's ridiculous that we are not watching all the trials that involve Donald Trump. I think we should be. I would certainly list the environment as a crucial concern. I would list guns as a crucial concern, although it was interesting. I was supposed to be on British TV earlier, and it got postponed, and I couldn't do it later, but it got postponed because there was another stabbing in London. And what's interesting is they don't have guns, so they have reverted to stabbing. Now that takes it's much harder, because you have to be up close and personal. Yeah, it's exactly, as opposed to hiding behind something and shooting someone. But I would certainly say guns in America ranks up there. I would say animal rights. I mean, you just had a potential vice presidential running mate for Donald Trump saying, yeah, my 14-month-old couldn't be trained. I shot him. I mean, that, and by the way, I also shot a goat because it smelled bad. And I shot 3 horses because I don't know why, I did. And no one is going, whoa, that's ridiculous. Is there no law in North Dakota that says you cannot abuse animals? Cruelty to animals is a crime in most places. We're living in a world that frightens me enormously, that these things are going on.
Yeah, it's totally
and that homelessness is not being dealt with. Yeah. I mean, there's just
mental
so many
health, homelessness, women's rights. It's amazing that we're in 2024, and yet you still now have to actually go out there and say, wait. I know the person is female, but we have to pay her the same amount that the male counterpart makes, despite the fact that she may be more qualified
Right.
than he. The fact that we are even having this conversation in 2024, the fact that we're having a conversation about a woman's right to choose, her own reproductive rights to choose.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start, and I clearly have no idea where to finish, other than to say what I had said about a half hour ago. We're regressing as a country,
Yes.
as far as civil rights are concerned, as far as constitutional rights are concerned. We are regressing as a country,
Right.
and it's really dangerous. So let me ask you this then. How can we ensure that our justice system remains fair and impartial, particularly when you're dealing with high-profile cases involving powerful individuals? And I want to expand on that. Not just powerful individuals, political figures, those with big money. And I'm talking about, you have $1 billion, you could take on the government, right? You don't? You basically eat shit through a straw and have a nice day. And whatever they end up sentencing you to, so be it.
Yeah.
It's human warehousing.
We're seeing that right in front of our eyes. And how do you stop it? If you have men of honor and women of honor running the government, it doesn't happen. If you have an engaged citizenry, it doesn't happen. But if you get a repeat of Donald Trump and you get a repeat of the people he brought in, not the first time, but at the end of the first time, because in the beginning there was pushback from people who were the adults in the room. By the end, they were all gone. And so who's going to come back this time? The cast of characters is going to be very scary. It is going to lead to, and the Democrats have said, we can't expand the court because then the Republicans would do it. Well, I think the Republicans will do it anyway. They've long had plans on controlling the state houses, and they've done a good job of running campaigns so that in a tie vote, the little teeny states will end up being the deciding factor. And so I think that Democrats need to start having much better strategy as well as much better messaging.
I think they got to have bigger balls. That's really the big problem.
Maybe
with all due respect, I think Joe Biden's doing a fantastic job as a president. There are things that I truly like that he's doing. There are things I don't particularly like. But for the most part, I think he's doing a fantastic job for the country. I'll tell you one big error that he made. Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland should not be the Attorney General. Merrick Garland should be on the Supreme Court. I am not being critical of Merrick Garland's intelligence or, his ability to be judicious. I am not. I believe he would be a great federal court, appellate court, judge, Supreme Court judge. But as an Attorney General, I think he's weak. He overthinks himself. He's afraid that somebody will cast him as another Bill Barr, coming off of somebody that had no scruples. Now you have somebody that doesn't want to do anything because he doesn't want his reputation to be tarnished at all. And the problem is, without having a legitimate Attorney General that's willing to get down and dirty based upon the crazy shit that we're all experiencing, I think it unfortunately makes Joe Biden look ineffective as a president.
So would you say that Joe Biden should fire Merrick Garland?
I thought he should have been fired after 6 months.
Well, he, again, this goes back to Edward Levy taking over after Watergate, when the Attorney General had been indicted and convicted, and many other people at that level were fired and were indicted and convicted. And so you had a situation where you had to rebuild trust in the system. And I think Edward Levy went very far to the side of let's reestablish the credibility of the department. I would say you got to reestablish the credibility of the Supreme Court. And I don't know how you do that because
I don't either.
There's so many young ones who are going to outlive us and continue to do the terrible things they're doing. I mean, I think there's a lot that needs fixing.
Y'all are crazy people. Y'all are absolutely nutty people.
I don't think that Merrick Garland is the sole cause of the problems we're having. The cause really is the kind of planning that the Republicans have done for years and years. They've outplanned us. They've outmessaged us. One of the last guests that Victor and I had on IGen Politics was Billy Ray, who is a screenwriter, who said, man, as soon as I saw Trump elected, I knew that I had to start getting involved, that I could not let this happen without using the skills that I have as a screenwriter, the messaging skills. And he's now advising 80 members of Congress, and he has come up with some great messaging, much of it being used. I mean, he was telling us about when the bridge collapsed because of the crash. He said, it's a simple message: rebuild, restore, and reopen. And it was rescue, rebuild, and reopen. And I thought that's exactly right. Rescuing what you could, and they did the best they could, and then you have to just get busy rebuilding it and reopening it. And that seemed to be a lot of what the administration was saying. So he may be advising more than members of Congress. Maybe he's advising the White House too. I think there are so many talented communicators within the Democratic Party that we should be taking better advice from them, that we should be making better use of them.
That's something I've been yelling at Jamie Harrison forever. I just think the messaging by by Democrats is just terrible compared to the messaging by the GOP, despite the fact the GOP's messaging is always a message of hate and anger and so on.
And lack of truth. Their messages are false.
By the way, what's better than not telling the truth, where people can get behind it because it plays to their, to their angers and so on. Which brings me to ask you this question. How do you think that the media's coverage of political events and controversies has influenced public opinion and perceptions on key issues?
I think I would say that the multiplicity of outlets is the problem. It's not so much that one says one thing it's that you get to pick what you hear. It's the siloing of information. In the old days, there were 3 networks and they all had the same facts. There was no debate about the facts. There was debate about the political policies that should stem from those facts, not about the truth of the facts. And nowadays, even within the Democratic Party, I'm not sure that we have agreement on what are the facts. Certainly between the Democrats and the Republicans, we do not have that. And so that to me is the biggest problem, is we have to come to a point where we can agree on the facts. I tried to have a conversation with a MAGA Trump supporter. And when she made certain comments, I said, well, there were 60 lawsuits and they were all lost because there was no facts. That the Republicans hired the ninjas in Arizona to find more votes for Trump, and he ended up finding more votes for Biden. And she said, well, I don't believe any of those things.
Right.
I believe that there were machines that flipped votes. I don't know how you have a conversation that will persuade that person that they are not relying on truth. They're not relying on information.
Jill,
They're relying on these made up things.
you clearly saw what happened to me, right, with OAN, right? I mean,
Exactly.
all of a sudden, I'm the one who had the affair with Stormy, and that Donald was good enough to give me $130,000 to pay her so that not to interfere in my marriage, right, and cause me harm. You know, I mean, talk about a fantastical story. And OAN issued a apology, a retraction. They took it off their server altogether, and so on. And it took, since it went up, it was about 4 or 5 weeks. The damage is already done.
Of course.
But I do have to say, at least they owned it and they acknowledged, you know, that it was a fake story, you know, and it was very shoddy and shitty journalism at best. But this is the problem. What ends up happening is it's not just, you see, when you're referring to in the 70s and even the 80s, there were only a couple of news stations altogether, right? There were.
Yes.
I remember as a kid, you used to turn the handle for changing the station. You only had like 3 or 4 stations altogether, right? Now you have thousands, but worse than even that is you have millions and millions of bloggers.
Yes.
And I consider myself to be not a blogger, but I have, you know, on my Mea Culpa podcast, over 350 million downloads. Political Beatdown, you know, #1 in the world on YouTube when we go on. And my TikTok now is crazy. 100,000+ people watching as I do that show, having fun with it.
Wow. That's fabulous.
I'm in competition with mainstream and cable news. And everybody's trying to outdo the next guy, right? And that's the problem. There is no fact checking whatsoever, because had OAN gone and fact check, they would have obviously realized that this guy Tony Saruga, whose partners are friends with Avenatti, was making the whole thing up. That even by just the sheer statement that was given to them, they had to realize that this was nonsensical. But they don't want to do that because it's all about bringing eyeballs to, you know, to their site, you know, and it's sad, you know.
It is very sad. I would like to go back to the days of bipartisanship, where justice prevailed, where the court acted based on the facts and the law of a particular case, not trying to set new rules, not looking for a way to infuse the decision with their own political views.
Right.
But we are where we are, and that's why it's up to, in my mind, it's up to Democrats to get out the vote and outvote by 2 or 3 times at least the situation that we currently have.
Well,
if we don't do that, we're done.
Sure. So then let me ask you this, because you bring up a good point here. What lessons then can we learn from past moments of political turmoil and division in American history? And how can we apply them right now to the challenges that we're currently dealing with?
You know, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Unfortunately.
And this goes back to our conversation about Gaza. The students protesting don't know the history. And we have, luckily, some great historians and political scientists who are sharing the background. You know, people like Cox Richardson, who I think is just an amazing historian and who writes such compelling stories. And I learn from reading it every night, or at least every night that she publishes her Substack. I think it's a question of just being informed and knowing what we need to know, and recognizing that not everybody knows everything, and that we ought to be looking at experts in the field instead of just saying, I saw a picture of a sad scene and I'm going to go after that policy. It needs to be put in context. And it would be good if Democrats and Republicans could listen to each other I have the feeling oftentimes that there's no hearing. Someone's speaking, but it ain't getting into the ear of the recipient.
Yeah.
That it's just they're not willing to hear opposing views, and they can turn on OAN or Fox or whatever they want and hear only things that fit their version of the world. I'd like to go back to the era where everybody had the same facts, and all we talked about was, well, would raising taxes
The
or
good old
lowering
Tip
taxes
O'Neill
fix
days,
it?
huh?
Yes, exactly. He was so right. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
he's a hero, and we need to go back to that. And in the meantime, I mean, I do think that Biden is doing an outstanding job, and that he is really good at communicating now, and that he's going to be, hopefully, the next president again. And I think I feel good about that.
Yeah, me too.
Not I think, I do feel good about that.
So, Jill, as a former Watergate prosecutor, what parallels, if any, do you see between that era and the current political climate?
There are some things that are obvious parallels, and then there are the ones that people are fighting so hard to avoid the parallels. I mean, you had two men who were weak characters, and that's a part of what all of the problems stem from. On the other hand, Nixon did believe in the rule of law, and when he was confronted with the facts and the reality that the Republicans weren't going to support him either, that they would vote to convict him, he resigned. When the Supreme Court said you have to turn over the tapes, he did. I believe that if Nara had come to him and said, you accidentally took some papers with you, you have to give them back, he wouldn't have sought to hide them. He would have given them back, because he did ultimately believe in the rule of law. And he also did some very good things. He opened China. He is responsible for the EPA. He's responsible for Title IX. He did some very good things. So I don't forgive him his criminality, which was obvious. But we're now in an era where we have someone else who is actually more overtly evil, not just of weak character, who's gotten away with it all his life. I'm sure his mother never punished him. The courts never punished him. Business opponents didn't punish him. People didn't sue him even though they didn't get paid, because it just wasn't worth it. And now he thinks he can get away with everything. And obviously he's learning he has to watch his mouth because of a gag order, and that there are consequences for that will escalate in severity. I don't know whether he can be controlled. I hope so. I hope that the case goes forward in a respectful way. But I do think that this announcement about, well, I would only be a dictator on day one. I don't believe that. I believe he would be a dictator on day two through the end of time, that he might not ever leave office. I am much more worried about the Supreme Court letting him get away with more and saying, if he's given immunity, that's the end of, theoretically, for the next rest of Biden's term, he could do the same thing.
But if the Supreme Court comes back and they grant this immunity claim, doesn't Joe Biden get the same immunity rights? And
yes, but he's a decent man, and he won't use that. He is not going to commit crimes in office. And
but he may end up doing it simply because he is a righteous and just man, right? Sometimes, you have no choice. In order to protect the greater good, you have to commit the sin. I mean, think about it. Nobody has ever tested anything like this before. One thing for certain, what we have learned is that the Constitution is only as good as the people who sit on the Supreme Court and the
Yes.
person who's sitting in the White House and, those that are surrounding that person. If they want to fuck with the Constitution, guys like, could you imagine a Ron DeSantis, who I think is, I think he's the male version of Kristi Noem. There's something seriously wrong with him too. These are the people that are at the helm of power in this country. When did we fall? When did we fall so deep?
So what conduct or what action would you say that Joe Biden could take to prevent the election of Donald Trump?
Well, let's not use Donald. Let's say anybody. Joe Biden, anybody, he would do exactly what Vladimir Putin did when Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was one of the richest oligarchs, went into the Kremlin years ago and said to Vladimir Putin, I want to run for the presidency. And Putin laughed at him and said, go back to your mansion that I let you have. So he said, no, I'm going to use my billions in order to run. Khodorkovsky jailed him, put him down into the subcellar under the Kremlin in the tombs, and took all his money. All right.
I don't think you want Joe Biden to do that, or else we could be living in Russia. And what's
to say that we're not going to with the next person anyway?
Well,
right. Hence my point.
I think the thing to do is to say it's up to the majority of Americans, and we are still the majority of Americans, to stop dithering about, oh, should I support RFK Jr.? Should I support whoever? Should I just stay home and not vote? No, you shouldn't. You need to get out there and vote for Joe Biden to preserve our way of life and to not have it be where we no longer have elections because they get called off, because and perish the thought that there would be a Republican House and Senate and president. They would change the Constitution. They would change all our laws.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but that's the point of what I brought up at the very beginning. If you have a president who states that they intend to rewrite the Constitution, to destroy our tripartite system of government, to do away with the legislative and the judiciary, and confer all power to the executive branch, you don't need to worry about whether the House, or the Senate stay, Republican or Democrat. You don't have to worry about what the Supreme Court will ultimately rule. They no longer exist. And if every single person that works for this individual believes that they have to sign a loyalty pledge to him or her, what's to stop you? You now have total control. You have control over the military. You have control over alleged government. You have total control. You are, in essence, the king.
I think it's much more complex than that. And I think the military, who takes an oath to the Constitution and are not allowed to follow an illegal order, would not go assassinate someone.
Yeah, I remember reading about that in 1930 and 1939 too.
Well, that's
right.
Yeah.
I remember those. I remember those books as well.
Yeah, that's and remember the role of student protests in that.
Exactly.
That's part of what led to allowing Hitler to be elected, was student protests. So, add that to the list of why the student protests are a real problem. But we can't end with a depressing. There's no hope thing.
This isn't an ending with depressing. It's why I concur with Jill when we both turn around and tell you, make sure that you are registered to vote. Make sure that you vote blue. Make sure that you vote for the Democrats up ballot and down ballot across the board. And let's turn around. And as I write in my book, the last line of my book, Revenge, Trumpism is fascism, and we must eradicate it
Yes.
from our body politic, plain and simple.
No truer words were ever spoken. We must do that, and it requires that everybody from youth up
Yep.
gets out and votes and recognizes the importance of voting for Joe Biden. I mean, it comes down to that. I mean, it's and not just Joe Biden, but I believe all the way, down ballot.
Agreed.
At your state level, at your U.S. representative, at the U.S. Senate, we need the power to take over. And as you see all these members of Congress leaving because nothing's getting done, we've got to go back to a time when there was actual bipartisanship, where there was compromise, where that wasn't a dirty word. People thought that's what Congress was supposed to do, was I give up a little, you give up a little. Otherwise, you never get anything done.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's sort of the crucial step right now, is to vote. It's 200, how many days away? I'm not keeping accurate count.
We're about 6 months out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not far off. So we gotta focus on that. And as far as I'm concerned, campaigning is important in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. You don't need a campaign in Illinois. It's blue. It's solidly blue. I'm not saying you should ignore it, because then the Republicans do their thing and it could change. But you got to go to the swing states where there's a hope that you could make a difference in the outcome.
Yep.
And I think it's a winnable election. Everything that I've seen, Biden has done so much, and so much that's good. I just think it's going to happen. I think we will get out there. I hope that this one issue, which everybody says, oh, this could cost the Democrats the whole thing.
I don't see that. But Jill, thank you for joining me again on Mea Culpa. Thank you for your insight and your, truly unique historical perspective on this. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on. I always enjoy talking with you. I learn a lot. It's very interesting. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jill.